The rain hammered the streets of downtown like bullets against concrete, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller fragments that caught the neon glow of the city's sleepless eyes. Marcus Chen pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, the fabric already surrendering to the relentless assault of the storm. His presentation had run 3 hours over schedule, the clients had been brutal, and his original hotel reservation had mysteriously vanished from their system. The Grandview Hotel stood before him like a beacon in the urban wilderness, a old money elegance wrapped in Art Deco splendor, the kind of place that whispered promises of thread count sheets and room service that actually arrived hot. Marcus didn't believe in luck, good or bad, but tonight he was grateful for whatever cosmic forces had led him to this sanctuary. The revolving door welcomed him with the soft whisper of well-oiled brass, and suddenly he was stepping from chaos into serenity, from the storm into stillness. The lobby embraced Marcus with the kind of understated luxury that spoke in whispers rather than shouts. Persian rugs stretched across marble floors so polished they seemed to hold secrets in their reflection. A grandfather clock in the corner measured time with the patience of centuries, its pendulum swinging in perfect rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat. The desk clerk materialized as if summoned by thought, Alonia, an elderly man whose silver hair caught the light like spun metal, whose smile seemed genuine enough to trust. The nameplate read, Harrison, and everything about him suggested decades of discretion and professional competence. Marcus felt his shoulders relax for the first time in hours. This was exactly what he needed, anonymous luxury, a comfortable bed, and 12 hours of dreamless sleep before his morning flight back to reality. Harrison said, "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grandview. How may I assist you tonight?" Marcus said, "I need a room for the night. Something quiet, preferably high up. I've had a very long day." Harrison said, "Of course, sir. Let me see what we have available." Harrison's fingers danced across the registry with the practiced grace of a pianist, each movement deliberate and precise. For a moment, something flickered across his features, a shadow that came and went so quickly Marcus almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant whisper of the air conditioning and the gentle tick of the grandfather clock. Marcus found himself studying the man's face, noting the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent reading people, understanding their needs before they voiced them. There was something almost paternal about Harrison, a quality that suggested he'd shepherded countless travelers through their darkest hours, providing sanctuary when the world outside grew too sharp, too demanding. Marcus felt an unexpected wave of gratitude toward the stranger who was about to provide him with exactly what he needed most, solitude and rest. Harrison said, "I have several excellent rooms available. May I suggest something on the 3rd floor? Very quiet, excellent city view." Marcus said, "Actually, do you have anything on the 4th floor? I always stay on the 4th floor when I travel. Call it a quirk." Harrison said, "The 4th floor. Let me check our availability there." The pause that followed stretched like a held breath, and Marcus found himself leaning forward slightly, sensing some invisible current of reluctance emanating from the desk clerk. Harrison's finger traced along the registry page with unusual deliberation, as if each room number carried weight beyond mere accommodation. When he looked up, his professional smile had tightened almost imperceptibly, the warmth cooling by a degree or two. Marcus noticed the change but attributed it to the late hour, the natural fatigue that settled over service industry workers as the night deepened. He was too tired to read between lines, too focused on the promise of clean sheets and silence to pass the subtle semiotics of hospitality. When Harrison finally selected a key from the drawer beneath the desk, his movements carried a ceremonial quality, as if he were performing a ritual rather than completing a simple transaction. The brass key caught the light, its surface worn smooth by countless hands, and Marcus felt an odd moment of connection to all the travelers who had held the same piece of metal, seeking the same refuge he now desperately needed. Harrison said, "Room 404 is available. It's quite comfortable. Are you certain about the 4th floor, mister?" Marcus said, "Chen. Marcus Chen. And yes, 4th floor is perfect. 404 sounds ideal." Harrison said, "Very well, Mr. Chen. Here is your key. The elevators are just past the sitting area. Should you need anything during your stay, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk." The elevator was a testament to a bygone era of craftsmanship, its brass accordion gate folding back to reveal mahogany paneling and mirrors that had witnessed decades of ascending hopes and descending disappointments. Marcus stepped inside, his reflection multiplied infinitely in the opposing mirrors, creating a tunnel of tired businessmen stretching into eternity. The button for the 4th floor felt unusually cold beneath his fingertip, the brass tarnished in a way that suggested countless touches, countless visitors making the same journey upward. As the elevator began its climb, Marcus closed his eyes and let the mechanical rhythm wash over him, the whisper of cables, the gentle vibration of the car, the soft ding as each floor passed. 1, 2, 3. The sound seemed to form a lullaby, promising the rest that waited just moments away. He thought about his presentation, about the clients' faces, about the contract that hung in the balance, but these concerns felt distant now, muffled by exhaustion and the strange peace that had settled over him since entering the Grandview. The elevator shuddered slightly as it reached the 4th floor, and Marcus opened his eyes to find his reflection staring back at him, looking oddly unfamiliar in the antique glass. The 4th floor corridor stretched before Marcus like a pathway through time, its burgundy carpet thick enough to swallow the sound of his footsteps and ornate enough to suggest the Grandview's golden age. Walls consist cast pools of amber light that alternated with pockets of shadow, creating a rhythm of illumination that felt almost hypnotic. The doors Iposida 401, 402, 403A stood like silent sentinels, each guarding its own collection of secrets, dreams, and midnight confessions. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and something else, something Marcus couldn't quite identify but that triggered an odd sense of nostalgia, as if he'd walked this hallway before in a dream he couldn't quite remember. Room 404 appeared at the corridor's end, its brass number plate catching the light with a dull gleam that seemed somehow more substantial than the others. Marcus paused before the door, key in hand, struck by a moment of unusual reflection. How many travelers had stood in this exact spot, fumbling for their keys, eager for the sanctuary that waited beyond? The thought brought a smile to his lips. He was becoming philosophical in his exhaustion, reading meaning into the mundane details of hotel architecture. Room 404 welcomed Marcus with the kind of understated elegance that justified the Grandview's reputation. The 4-poster bed dominated the space, its mahogany frame carved with intricate details that spoke of master craftsmen and unhurried attention to beauty. Heavy burgundy drapes covered tall windows that promised a view of the city below, and a writing desk positioned near the window invited correspondence or late-night work sessions. The furniture arrangement felt perfect and not merely functional, but composed, as if someone with an artist's eye had considered every angle, every relationship between objects. Marcus set his suitcase beside the dresser and allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, a space that felt more like a sanctuary than a simple accommodation. The bed looked inviting, the linens crisp and white, promising the kind of sleep that erased the day's accumulated stress. Even the room's silence felt luxurious, a complete absence of the urban chaos that had been his soundtrack for the past 18 hours. He moved toward the window, eager to see his temporary domain's view of the city, but found himself pausing at the writing desk, his fingers tracing the leather inlay of its surface. Marcus said, "Now this is more like it." The laptop's glow transformed the writing desk into an island of productivity in the room's gathering darkness. Marcus found himself settling into a familiar rhythm, the soft percussion of keystrokes, the gentle hum of the hard drive, the satisfaction of organizing thoughts into coherent arguments for tomorrow's follow-up meeting. The desk seemed designed for exactly this purpose, its height perfect, its surface spacious enough for both computer and notes. He'd filled the water glass from the bathroom tap, and the crystal tumbler caught the laptop's light beautifully, refracting it into tiny rainbows that danced across the desk's leather surface. The work absorbed him completely, each paragraph bringing clarity to ideas that had seemed muddled during the day's chaotic presentations. It was only when he reached for the water glass that Marcus noticed it was full again, though he distinctly remembered draining it moments before. He paused, staring at the glass, trying to reconstruct when he might have refilled it. The memory wouldn't come. Behind him, the curtain stirred slightly, though he was certain the windows were closed and the air conditioning wasn't running. These details registered peripherally, filed away by a mind too focused on work to process their significance. The bathroom mirror reflected a man who looked older than Marcus remembered, the day's stress etched in lines around his eyes that seemed deeper in the antique glass. The fluorescent lights cast an unflattering pallor over his features, making him appear almost ghostly against the white tile backdrop. As he brushed his teeth, Marcus found himself studying this reflection with unusual intensity, noting details he typically ignored, the way his hair had begun to thin at the temples, the slight asymmetry of his smile, the tiredness that seemed to emanate from his very bones. The lights flickered so briefly he almost missed it, a momentary dimming that could have been attributed to the building's age or the storm's effect on the power grid. The faucet dripped with an irregular rhythm that seemed almost musical, each drop striking the porcelain with a different tone, creating an accidental symphony in the small space. Marcus turned off the tap with more force than necessary, seeking silence, but the dripping continued, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short again. He ignored the pattern, too tired to puzzle over the quirks of old plumbing, and returned to the main room where the bed waited like a promise. Marcus said, finally. Sleep. The bed embraced Marcus with the kind of comfort that money couldn't always buy. Sheets that felt like silk against his skin, a mattress that seemed to mold itself to his body's exact contours, pillows that cradled his head with perfect support. The room's darkness was complete and welcoming, broken only by the thin lines of city light that managed to slip through the heavy curtains. For the first time in days, Marcus felt his mind beginning to quiet, the constant chatter of deadlines and obligations fading into blessed silence. His breathing deepened, his muscles relaxed, and consciousness began its gentle retreat towards sleep. It was in this liminal space between waking and dreaming that he became aware of the room's subtle movements, as shadows that seemed to shift independently of any light source, the soft whisper of fabric that might have been curtains stirring in a breeze that didn't exist. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red in the darkness, 11:47 p.m. Marcus watched the numbers, waiting for the minute to change, but 11:47 seemed to stretch impossibly long, as if time itself had decided to pause. When the display finally shifted, it jumped directly to 11:53, skipping 6 minutes in an instant. Marcus blinked, certain he must have dozed off, but his mind felt crystal clear. Sleep retreated like a tide, leaving Marcus stranded on the shores of wakefulness with a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in room 404. The darkness felt different now, and not merely the absence of light, but a presence unto itself, thick and almost breathing. The temperature seemed to fluctuate in waves, moments of comfortable warmth alternating with pockets of cold that raised goosebumps along his arms. He lay perfectly still, listening to sounds that might have been the building settling or might have been something else entirely, soft whispers that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves, a rhythmic creaking that sounded almost like footsteps in the corridor above, the distant ding of the elevator arriving at floors that should have been empty at this hour. Marcus's rational mind catalogued each anomaly, seeking logical explanations. Old buildings made noise, air conditioning systems created temperature fluctuations, his exhaustion was making him hypersensitive to normal environmental details. But his body told a different story, adrenaline beginning to course through his veins, his heart rate increasing despite his attempts to remain calm. The clock still glowed 11:53, the numbers unwavering now, as if time had decided to stop entirely within the confines of room 404. Marcus said, "What the hell?" The lamp's sudden illumination revealed a room that was familiar yet subtly wrong, like a photograph that had been altered in ways too small to immediately identify but too significant to ignore. The writing desk chair faced the bed now, positioned as if someone had been sitting there in the darkness, watching him sleep. Marcus was certain he'd left it pushed under the desk, certain with the kind of clarity that comes from obsessive attention to detail. The water glass stood not only full but overflowing, a steady stream cascading onto the desk's leather surface and pooling on the floor below. The furniture seemed to have shifted positions by inches, the dresser slightly closer to the window, the mirror angled differently, reflecting parts of the room that should have been hidden. These changes were subtle enough that Marcus might have dismissed them individually, but collectively they created an unmistakable impression. Room 404 was not merely a space he occupied, but an entity that occupied him in return. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, seeking the comfort of connection to the outside world, but the device showed no signal, its screen reflecting his frightened face like a black mirror. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful but expectant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for his next move. Marcus understood with crystalline clarity that he was no longer alone in room 404, and perhaps had never been alone since the moment he turned the key in the lock. Marcus said, "This isn't possible. This can't be happening."